Hi everyone, it's Mike and Laura Wade again, coming to you live from our kitchen this time. Today we're going to read a story from book 14, one of our very favorites. It's called When We Were Little.
Once upon a time, in a classroom just down the hall, I met a boy named Gordon Smith. It was the first day of JK. I was sitting on a carpet with about 20 other 4-year-olds. Several kids were crying for their mummies, but I ignored their immature behavior and spent my time tasting some brightly colored plastic blocks I'd found in the bin. Suddenly, there was a commotion out in the hall that caught everyone's attention and stopped even the loudest of criers mid-wail. It was a sound of people singing, a man and a woman. I didn't recognize the song, but the words had something to do with happy days, which were here again. For where I sat on the carpet, I didn't see what there was to be so happy about, but when the singers burst through the classroom's doorway, you'd have thought it was Christmas and their birthdays all rolled into one. With them was a blonde-haired boy. It was the first time I ever laid eyes on Gordon. Now, I'd seen kids in shopping malls and amusement parks with leashes around their waists held by their mothers or fathers to keep their kids from running off. But this was the first time I'd ever seen a kid tied to 2 leashes. Each parent used both hands to firmly hold a leash in an attempt to keep their struggling son under control. I watched as the teacher, an older woman who looked like a friendly grandma, carefully approached the parents.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Brown, she told the parents. And who do we have here, she asked, looking warily at Gordon. This is Gordon Smith, said the mother, as she and her husband unclipped the leashes from Gordon's waist and quickly made their way to the door. Careful, he's a biter and a runner, but other than that, he's an adorable child. Good luck. And they were gone. Gordon stood perfectly still for a full minute, his eyes scanning the entire room. Then, without warning, he turned and bolted for the door. Luckily, Mrs. Brown was an experienced teacher, and she had already locked the classroom door. Discovering that he couldn't make his escape that way, Gordon grabbed a chair and dragged it over to a window. He was halfway to freedom before Mrs. Brown hauled him back into the room. She held the struggling Gordon like a football under one arm, while with her free hand, she buzzed the office. I've got a real live one down here, she said. I need some help. In a few minutes, there was a knock at the door, and another woman entered the room. She spoke with Mrs. Brown for a few minutes in whispers, and then Mrs. Brown released Gordon. His parents said he's a biter and a runner, warned Mrs. Brown as the woman led Gordon to a table at the back of the room. Gordon must have decided he didn't want to sit at the table because he kicked the chair away. I guess we can add kicker to the list, she groaned.
Mrs. Brown spent the rest of the morning with the 20 of us on the carpet while Gordon spent the entire time trying to escape. Halfway through the morning, a different woman came in to sit with Gordon. He was wearing them out in shifts. This new woman clearly underestimated Gordon. She turned her back on him for a few seconds, and Gordon took a small blue bead that he'd found on the floor and stuck it up his nose. The woman tried to get it out without success, and then Mrs. Brown gave it her best shot. Eventually, the school nurse had to be called in. When she failed to get the beads out of Gordon's nose, it was in much too deep, she said. The school had to call 911, and Gordon headed off to the hospital in an ambulance. I was only 4 years old, but I knew right then that these women were no match for Gordon Smith. Gordon returned the next day with a small bandage on his nose, but otherwise looking no worse for the wear. He must have decided that school wasn't so bad after all, because he didn't try to run away even once. During playtime, he seemed especially interested in the water table, but so were lots of other kids. I expected Gordon to push his way in or make a fuss if he didn't get to play with the little boats, but he surprised me by calmly walking away from the crowded table. The class played nicely for about 20 minutes, and then I saw a worried expression cross Mrs. Brown's face. Has anyone seen Gordon? She asked anxiously. We all shook our heads and went back to playing. And then we heard it, a scream so loud, 3 teachers from nearby classrooms came running into the room to see what was going on. It's coming from the bathroom, shouted Mrs. Brown, and all 4 adults rushed to the little room at the back of our classroom. There, they found Gordon with his foot stuck deep in the toilet bowl. A little toy boat floated in the water. Mrs. Brown tried to calm Gordon down while another teacher attempted to pry his foot loose, but that just made Gordon howl even louder. The custodian rushed in and tried to help, but no one was able to get Gordon's foot out of the toilet. The principal finally had to call in a plumber who had to smash the toilet apart to get Gordon's foot out.
On the third day of school, Gordon managed to get his head stuck between two bars in the stair railing. None of the teachers were strong enough to pull the bars apart, so they covered Gordon's head in dish soap with the hope that his head would just slide out, which it didn't. In the end, the principal had to call the fire department, and the jaws of life were used to pry the bars away from Gordon's head to free him. On the fourth day of school, Gordon pulled an entire pack of bubble gum out of his pocket and he shoved every single piece into his mouth all at once during snack time. We watched as he impressively blew a giant bubble, jumping when it popped and exploded all over his face and hair. Mrs. Brown tried cutting it out with scissors, but it turns out the kindergarten scissors aren't very sharp. In the end, the principal had to drive him to a barber shop, where the barber said the only solution was to shave his head completely bald.
Friday finally arrived, and I couldn't wait to see what Gordon would do next. So far, I hadn't learned much of anything at school, but it sure was entertaining. To my disappointment, however, the morning passed without incident. Today, Gordon was well behaved. He sat on the carpet and listened to stories. He played at the water table and the block center, and he quietly ate his snack and lunch. Just when Mrs. Brown thought she was going to make it through the day without having to rush Gordon to the hospital or call the fire department, she made the mistake of taking our class outside for gym. We had been playing on the equipment all week during recess. There were swings, a jungle gym, and a huge metal slide. The slide was Gordon's favorite. In fact, he liked it so much that he got it into his head that he could set a world record for going down the slide the fastest. Now was his chance. As we changed into our outdoor shoes, Gordon took something out of his cubby and slipped it into his pocket. When Mrs. Brown's back was turned, he wasted no time putting his plan into action the minute we got outside. Ducking behind the shed in the schoolyard, Gordon stripped down to his underwear. Then he took a jar of Vaseline out of his pocket and smeared it all over his body. He covered his arms, his legs, and his stomach. He even slathered his bald head. Then he came tearing out from behind the shed, and as the entire class watched, Gordon ran up the stairs of the slide and yelled, "Hey, watch this, everyone!" And then it happened. "No!" yelled Mrs. Brown, racing toward the slide, but she was too late. Gordon pushed himself down the slide with all his might. The Vaseline took effect, and Gordon streaked down like a bolt of lightning. He reached the bottom of the slide and became airborne. Most slides have gravel or grass at the bottom to cushion a Charles landing, and ours was no different. But Gordon was going so fast that he overshot the landing, flew across the playground, and landed in a long jump pit. He hit the sand and rolled several feet, finally coming to a stop. Mrs. Brown raced to the scene, followed by the entire class and several teachers who had witnessed Gordon's epic flight from their classroom windows. Gordon stood up and rubbed sand out of his eyes. "Oh, thank goodness you're all right," said Mrs. Brown in a trembling voice, trying to brush off the sand. But the sand wouldn't brush off. It was stuck to the Vaseline. Gordon was completely covered from head to toe in sand. He looked like a breaded pork chop ready to be popped into the oven. Sighing heavily, Mrs. Brown took Gordon by the hand and led him into the school with the rest of the class trailing along behind. It took the principal, 3 teachers, and the custodian an hour to scrape the sand and Vaseline off of him. The following Monday, I couldn't wait to get to school to see what Gordon would do next. I ran into the classroom when the bell rang and took my place on the carpet, eagerly awaiting for the day to begin. But much to my surprise, Mrs. Brown wasn't there. In her place was another teacher. "Hello, boys and girls," she began. "I have an announcement to make. Mrs. Brown suddenly decided to take early retirement, and I am your new teacher. My name is Mrs. Hogsworth. Now," she said, narrowing her eyes and scanning the group of 4-year-olds before her, "which one of you is Gordon?"
The end. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed that story called When We Were Little by M. and L. Wade. If you like this story, you can find 13 others for free on our website at boysbookshelf.com. Thank you. Have a good day and stay safe, everyone.